much, Miss Singh, for doing this. I was thinking about this conversation when I found out we'd be doing that, and I was like, I am so out of my depth here. She has more experience in this domain than I like longer experience in this domain than I've been alive. I'm all of 24 right now,
I'm
and
70.
say that again.
I'm 70.
Right. Yeah. So I mean, you're journalistic royalty in a way, right? And so for me, somebody who's so interested in this, let's say, a newer form of journalism, if it's not
Yeah.
precisely fact finding, it's more on the side of like opinion, but I'd still consider it new age media of some nature. Thank you so much for doing this.
You're welcome. I'm happy to be here.
Right. So we were just going off about how media storms, when we look back at them with the privilege of hindsight, once say the cyclone is over, they appear to be very different from what is happening while we're inside it.
Hmm.
And the last cyclone that I saw get evaporated is the whole Bollywood fiasco,
Hmm.
right? And I think it's so interesting because now that I look back, it seems more like an attempt to maneuver power or shift hands of power than anything at all that was claimed prima facie.
Yes.
Do you think that makes sense, or am I being too aggressive? Am I being too harsh?
But no, you're absolutely right. I actually wrote in my column this weekend, 2 days ago, about exactly this because you see, they've been. I met a man, which I write in the column, some years ago, in 2015 in Delhi, and he's one of the RSS intellectuals. I don't want to name him because it was a private conversation, and unlike my son, I don't reveal private conversations. I don't reveal names. But anyway, he said to me that Bollywood was on target for the RSS because they didn't like the kind of stuff that was going on in Bollywood, and there are too many Muslims in Bollywood. And he said, "ये जो खान है, इनकी ताकत कुछ ज़्यादा है, और हम अब हिंदू लड़कों को तैयार कर रहे हैं कि ताकि उनके सिक्स पैक्स वगैरह हो जाएं और वो इनको चैलेंज कर सकें." So this is an old RSS idea, which really begins almost in the first few months of Modi becoming prime minister, and it's because the values that Bollywood represents have no place in India today. I mean, you see the brutish side of the new values in Uttar Pradesh and on social media, with the trolls, etc. But love jihad isn't a small thing for them. They really believe that Muslims in India go around hunting out pretty Hindu girls to seduce and marry, and so Bollywood, which doesn't accept these ideas of caste and religion, and where interfaith marriage has been common since the beginning of Bollywood, hmm,
Hmm.
they really don't like this because you see, it sort of diminishes the idea of India that they're trying to create, and they are creating a new idea.
Hmm. There's so many places I kind of sort of want to go from here. But let me try. So it seems like, and I think it's only for the better, that once a different meritocratic characteristic takes precedence,
Mhm.
ideas of identity sort of become secondary. So, say for instance, and I'm no fan of Bollywood, just as a disclaimer. Say
I'm
as
a
soon as
huge fan of Bollywood.
you're
I'm a real admirer of Bollywood.
oh you are
I believe that it's Bollywood that has reflected the changes in India better than we in the media have.
hmm, hmm,
Bollywood, if you go back in the 60s, it was a kind of, the beginning of a new era where there was, they were just beginning to grasp that the old middle class viewership was changing. And then if you see in the 60s, they have Shami Kapoor and all that kind of thing, and a happy new India. And by 75, when the emergency is declared, they begin to talk of the angry young man without realizing that actually they were reflecting a political reality. So I'm a big fan. But anyway, go on.
right. My point is, as soon as artistic say skill becomes more important, it seems like in all institutions, in all hierarchies, physical or ethnic identities become more secondary, right? And it seems like it seems like for that reason, Bollywood has sort of become the last fortress of, or last standing tall fortress of some kind of a secular vision of India. And I don't even know if the word secular is safe to use in our times. Like there was a point in time where secular was obviousness, but there have been so many revelations, there have been so many discussions and discourses that have sort of changed my mind, or at least made me unsure of using secular. And I wonder, my concern is, what are these values that Bollywood sort of embodies that do not gel with this new idea of India that is being created?
Well, you see, don't use the word secular, because nobody, no political party in India has a right to use that word. In fact, initially I began my support for Narendra Modi because I felt that he was targeted in a way that other chief ministers who presided over much worse massacres, and a prime minister who justified the only real pogrom in India, which was against the Sikhs. And nobody thought that Rajiv Gandhi was a villain,
Mm.
or that nobody even remembers the names of the chief ministers of Uttar Pradesh who presided over much worse riots. So I actually supported him on that, because I thought that the idea that secularism is the binding glue of India, etc., is wrong. What is the binding glue of India is the Sanatan Dharma, the idea that everyone has a right to worship the way they want to, and to understand religion in their way. And dharam, there's no word for dharam in Sanskrit or Hindi. It's mazhab. I mean, there's no word for mazhab. Dharam doesn't mean that. So
Mhm.
it's, I mean, if you want to sit down and put a little tika on a piece of stone and say this is my isht, that's fine. And Bollywood somehow reflects that idea of the Sanatan Dharma, that
Mm.
even if you're a Dalit, and if you're a good actor and they accept you, if the box office is the only thing that matters in Bollywood, right?
Mm.
They leave it to the people to judge. And
Mm.
I think that is a wonderful idea. It is actually India's greatest contribution to the world, in my view, is this very modern idea of religion, which
Mm.
is find your way, you
Mm.
know and it's gone to the West as Buddhism, but actually it is the Sanatan Dharma.
Right.
It's the idea. And there's no book, there's no messiah banging you on. By the way, we must talk about my book Messiah Modi at some
Right.
point.
Right. 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 Right.
But there isn't a son of God or a messenger of God or anything like that. And if you think that there are the avatars of Vishnu, go ahead and believe that. And
Mm.
even there, you have a choice,
Mm.
right? Buddha, Krishna, Ram, whatever. So
Mm.
Bollywood, in many ways, in fact, in every sense, really expresses that wider idea of India, of
Mm.
being a very generous country, even when it has come up with faiths like Christianity and Islam, which say, you're a heathen and we're going to break your temples. Even that they managed to deal with. Now what they're doing is to try and reopen the wounds of history and put chilies into them and make
Mm.
and hatred into them. And that is a very sad thing, because they won't be able to destroy Bollywood. I
Mm.
mean, Hitler tried to destroy popular culture in Germany and didn't succeed,
Mm.
and they won't be able to destroy it. But even the effort that they're making is, in my view, very, very dangerous and very worrying.
Just to be clear, because this is a very interesting notion. I'd never thought of Bollywood as representing any form of Sanatan Dharma up until, but I take that. And would you then be saying that it is this exemplary display of the libertarian idea of religion, or for that matter, identity, that Bollywood sort of encapsulates, that is not compatible with, say, the current government's new idea of India? Is that what you're saying? That Sanatan Dharma is not okay with them?
It's not at all okay with them that Salman Khan, on when there's Ganpati going on, is busy, doing puja in his house.
Mm.
And Shah Rukh Khan does the same. And it's not at all okay with them that I mean, you go to anyone in Bollywood, any house, they'll have murtis, and they'll pray on Eid if you want them to. And it really is India
mm,
as it has always been.
mm,
It's because people come there from so many states and so many different places that it really embodies that really profound idea
mm,
of generosity when it comes to religion, right?
mm,
And with these guys, they don't want that generosity because they're dealing with those wounds of history.
mm,
So, for them, Bollywood represents all the things that they despise.
mm, mm, mm. Because the present narrative is sort of that we've forgotten and made peace with those
Yeah.
wounds of history instead of treating them. What is the
Yeah.
legitimacy of something like that? Have we not treated those wounds? Is the way Bollywood proceeded to say, using just Bollywood as a placeholder, not treating the wounds, instead ignoring it, instead harmonizing it at the cost of, actually healing it?
Now let's get beyond Bollywood because this
Right.
is a much deeper question,
Mhm.
and we haven't dealt with the wounds of history. Okay, we've forgotten them. But I'll tell you that as a Sikh, when I go to that gurdwara in which they buried alive two of Guru Gobind Singh's grandsons, not grandsons, his sons,
Hmm.
they were asked to convert to Islam, and by the governor of where is that wretched gurdwara? It's somewhere in the Punjab. I think it's somewhere near Malaysia, and I've even forgotten the name of the gurdwara
Hmm.
because I haven't been there in a long time. But these boys were 7 and 8, and every day the Muslim governor would come and say, "Convert to Islam, and you'll be freed." And finally, they end up being buried alive because they refused to convert to Islam. Now,
Hmm.
I'm not a big, religious person, but I can't go into that gurdwara
Hmm.
without feeling that wound of history,
Hmm.
right? And similarly, when I remember the first time I went to Christian Janmabhoomi, which was going to be the next campaign, um, I remember it was Janmashtami, and we went down under an Eidgah
Hmm.
to this cell, which has to this day, when you go in there, I don't know whether you've been, have you?
I don't think so. Not in
You
my
go
conscious
in
memory.
there and you know for sure that Krishna was born in that dungeon, do you know?
Hmm.
And over it is an Eidgah. Now, I really think that there should have been something like a kind of, like like Mandela did in South Africa, where you have a truth commission and
Hmm.
get all your Shankaracharyas and your Maulvis and everybody to come together and say, look, this is what hurts us.
Hmm.
And we have to recognize that temples were broken. We have to acknowledge, in my view, the Muslims should come together and say, give back Christian Janmabhoomi and give back the
Hmm.
Vishwanath Mandir in Banaras.
Hmm.
And now let's stop, right?
Hmm.
So unfortunately, what they did was they stopped at Somnath,
Hmm.
so there was the Ayodhya thing. And then because the so-called distortion of secularism, it was
Hmm.
encouraged by Indira Gandhi and Rajiv Gandhi, this whole Hindutva thing.
Hmm.
And so none of them are secular. They're
Hmm.
just politicians who
Hmm.
want to divide people. But this lot wants to do a little bit more, and they want to pour, I don't know, you pour chilies and hatred into the
Hmm.
wounds of history.
Hmm.
That I think is a bad thing.
Hmm.
Deal with the past.
Hmm.
You've got to deal with it. You can't pretend it didn't happen.
Hmm.
Deal with it and move on.
Hmm. Right. It's very important for the latter half to happen. Like, how long do we plan on? I'm I'm fine with us going into the past and then healing our wounds, but how long are we going to dwell on it, and how long are we going to dwell on it at the cost of our own domestic peace? And if that, it may not arrive tomorrow, but we must have an answer, because it seems like what happens is that there is an overt denial, but there is an explicit display of, let's just say, communal boundaries,
Hmm.
right? That get propagated through acts of omission more often than overt acts of commission. And for people like myself, for people who are interested, who may even be interested enough to go out and search for how to make sense of this country that I'm born in, because I have a very unique um, me and my generation has a very unique conundrum, uh, which is to the effect of we were raised in schools with a different concept of India than what we're facing right now, and it's very hard to sort of
Tell me what that concept was.
like I always used to wonder when we'd be taught unity in diversity as a slogan, like that was such an emphatic slogan, and I'd wonder even then, it was like, why is that something we're proud of, like just on a first principle level. And the more I discovered, the more I read into politics, the more I realized, first of all, diversity is a bloody problem, not in the sense where it should be eliminated, but that it is a problem to handle. There is too many pieces on the board suddenly. And then this idea of unity and diversity, this hand holding picture of a Christian or Sikh, a Muslim, and a Hindu is pretty Bollywood. One way of saying that, it's pretty Bollywood and not as real or as say integral to the vision of India,
Mm.
as imagined by our leaders. And much like you, back in 2014, I was very fond of the idea of Modi. I was like, finally somebody's willing to put everything else aside and they're going to talk economics. Because say what you will, if there is no jobs and if there's no money and if there's no flow of cash in the economy, all cultural wars, all narrative wars, all cultural ideas will dissolve into violence super quickly.
Mm.
There is just no other way to sustain it, right?
Yeah.
And the more I waited and the more I saw, I came to this, like, the 2019 election was more confusing than
Mm.
clear after 5 years of Modi, right? And
Mhm.
it wasn't just for me, but
Were you here or were you in the
I
States?
was still there. I was still there, but I was keeping an eye. It was more confusing in the sense that there wasn't nobody else to trust, but I didn't know how much I could trust Mr. Modi with my government
Mm.
anymore either, right? And it creates this sort of a cognitive dissonance kind of a phenomenon where I'm left defending somebody I don't truly trust,
Mm.
because the alternative is just so much worse. Or
Yeah.
if not, right, there's deeper
There
wounds,
is no alternative.
right? There is no alternative.
Mm.
And so a lot of people who have the best of interests for the nation, for the community, for the society in their heart, don't know how to resolve this conundrum for themselves.
See, I mean, I've written it often. I supported Modi because he said, हम एक नए रास्ते पे चलेंगे, लेके जाएंगे देश को एक नई दिशा में,
Hmm.
हाँ, आर्थिक, राजनीतिक वगैरह. He never mentioned Hindutva.
Hmm.
At that point, all that he talked about was एक नई आर्थिक दिशा, which is
Hmm.
exactly what we need to do.
Right.
Because, let's not, mince words. The economy that was created under socialism has been the ruin of India.
Hmm.
India has no reason to be a poor country. He used to say this, Modi. He used to say, I can't see any reason why India should be a poor country.
Hmm.
But those first decades after independence, till the reform process, when all they did was they stopped industrial licensing and India boomed for 10 years, right? Actually, more than 10 years. I think the boom started in about 95. Suddenly you had jobs outside government. You don't remember, you weren't born then. Until then, the most educated Indian, the guys who went to Harvard and Cambridge and Oxford, wanted a government job. There was nothing else they could do. There were no universities that they could work in. There was nothing at all. And at the lowest level, all they wanted was a government job that would give them a fixed income, even if it didn't last, if it wasn't much, it would last forever, right?
Hmm.
After 91, all he did was just one move, Narasimha Rao. He stopped the license Raj. And you had, suddenly there were gyms opening and restaurants and libraries and private universities and private airlines. And, you know, that continued right up to Madam Sonia Gandhi deciding that no, this had to stop and we had to go back to because her hero is not her husband, but her mother in law.
Hmm.
And so, we went back to socialism and big welfare programs and Mai Baap Sarkar and the Janta sitting there with a begging bowl high, waiting for the crumbs that would fall out towards them. So that is when the decline started, in my view, in 2006, 2009, really.
Hmm.
When she won that second election, for instance, now we've seen with Modi, he's won the second election and you see a different face. Similarly with Sonia, when she won the 2009 election, Manmohan Singh was suddenly put into retirement and, she took over. She was de facto prime minister, waiting, keeping the seat warm for her son, right? And she went back to spending money on these huge programs that just makes Indians into beggars. So instead of creating real jobs, you create, dole on a
Hmm.
massive scale, and you spend crores and crores of lakhs of rupees on that. Instead of that, Modi was suggesting a new way and spoke against these very programs in the Lok Sabha. Do you remember he said, मनरेगा को मैं कभी नहीं बंद करूंगा क्योंकि मैंने याद दिलाना है आपको कि 70 सालों के बाद आपने जो रोजगार बनाया है वो सिर्फ ये कि आप खड्डा खोदें उसमें मिट्टी डालें और मिट्टी निकालें.
Hmm.
Right?
Hmm. Hmm. Hmm.
And now then he put more money into this. Now, how did that happen? What went wrong? And that's really a book in itself. I actually believe that when he failed with demonetization, which he thought was really the magic voodoo economics, which RSS lot always believe in, and when that failed, he sort of lost confidence. So the reason why he won in 2019 is not confusing at all. If you were wondering about the countryside, they said, "Ji, pehli baar हमने भ्रष्टाचार कम होते देखा है." So those big programs that were leaking like sieves, he actually delivered those programs to the people. So for them, they have such basic minimum needs that if you can just give them electricity and water and clean roads and a clean village, they'll vote for you. And he did that, you know. But now that we've been hit by COVID, he seems to be completely out of his depths on what to do economically. And unfortunately, the economists he surrounded himself with are chamchas. None of them has the guts to say, "Sir, this is what we must do now." For instance, I am actually, I live with a businessman, right, who's in the construction business. And government owes him huge amounts of money, which government is not paying. So you've got a lot of other companies like that work with the government who would be blue chip companies if you paid them, right? Secondly, you have other people who you have very, very skilled. We have the best industrialists, the best businessmen in the world, but the regulation, the inspector Raj that he has brought in, makes it impossible for them to function. It's almost a regulation a minute. Do you know? Now, I don't know whether you've been following the Vodafone story.
A little bit.
Vodafone just won its case against the government of India. The government of India put a retroactive tax on
that. I know. Yeah.
I mean, so it's virtually that you could go back to England and charge the East India Company taxes.
Right.
It's a ridiculous law.
Right.
And they should have got rid of it a long time ago. But instead of that, what are they doing now? They've gone to the International Court of Arbitration, or whatever it's called, the tribunal, that has ruled in the favor of Vodafone. And the Indian government spokesmen are still saying, no, we'll go further. We're not going to allow this to happen. How is that going to work? Now, for instance, we're making the iPhone 12 in India.
I think so. There's production plants, yes.
Yeah, no. It's going to be available for 1,20,000 in India, because the taxes are so high. But it's 84,000 in Dubai. And the ticket to Dubai, as somebody's pointed out on Twitter, is 20,000 rupees.
I saw Dhruv post that, yes.
Yeah, yeah. Do you know him?
I've spoken to Dhruv once.
Yeah. Okay, well, I mean, how ridiculous is that?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. The list goes on.
The list goes on.
Right. Like, I mean, I was a student of chartered accountancy once, and I remember reading income tax, the act. And I was like, some of this stuff makes no sense. Like, how can you tax somebody on an income they haven't earned? It's notional, but it's archaic. And we don't seem to revise our laws as often as we probably should, even though 25% of the finance budget is dedicated to revising income tax act. It just doesn't seem to like. But here is a very interesting notion that I was playing with Atish as well. And it's that when we're sitting on the outside, I see my social circles talk about these political issues, and they talk about these political issues with such grand attributions. Like Prime Minister Modi, Rahul Gandhi is concerned with the welfare of the people, right? They have a grand vision for India. However, they phrase it. There is sort of like this grandiosity, this heroic narrative, one way or the other. It might not be as poetically heroic as say Bollywood turns out to be, but it's heroic regardless. And when you come one degree further, as probably I have, in contrast to my friend group, I realize there is a lot of like proximate local motivations, very, very like, so for instance, it seems like from the outside that he would do away with these regulations, but somehow it comes down to the fact that they double down on these regulations instead for some other reason. Or for that matter, it might seem like, demonetization, what a brilliant move, but it's just some silly advice from an economist that is not as thorough as he should be, that surrounds the prime minister right now.
From an economist who's not an economist.
Right. Right.
As Bhagwati, who teaches in your university,
Right.
said
Yes.
once about the most important RSS economist. He said, that man's an economist, I'm a Bharatnatyam dancer.
Yes. Right. So am I correct in my understanding that this attribution problem to people we see in the media, in the news, behind a screen, is usually off key? Like if you were any closer to them, you'd realize that their motivations are very different from what we project onto them.
Yes, but also I really believe that that Indian schools teach history very badly. And so I'm very happy actually that I think the best thing he's done is this new education policy, which has taken it out of the hands of the bureaucrats. Now, for instance, with me, I'm a political journalist, but when I studied political science in St. Bede's College, Simla, I came away understanding nothing, zero. I didn't even understand different forms of government. I came out of that college, and I read all the time. I'm a big reader. I came out without even knowing which history books to read to help me with my, courses, etc. I left school at 14 because they made a mistake about the class that I should be in. So, we don't really, and this is the highest level. This is, get the best. You go to an ordinary school or college,
right,
in rural India, and you feel ashamed. So, in some ways, what he's doing is the right thing when he identifies education, healthcare. They've, I think, tripled the amount they're going to spend on healthcare. He has identified where they've gone wrong, the Congress Party. But I believe he should have gone further. I think that he should insist that every official, elected and unelected, must use those, their children must go to those schools and they must use those hospitals. Only then will it improve. So what you get in the history books that we read is, Chacha Nehru is a great hero and Mahatma Gandhi is a great Mahatma, and there can be nothing bad said about them. That's when you're on the secular side. When you're on the non-secular government, like we technically have now, then Deen Dayal Upadhyay, who nobody'd ever heard of. I didn't even, this obscure little scholar whose work no one knows, has, in his name, they've changed the name of Mughal Sarai railway station. That's one of the most important junctions, train junctions in northern India. And Mughal Sarai, it's so obvious that you shouldn't do that. No one's ever going to call it Deen Dayal Upadhyay junction.
Right, let's be more realistic. Yes, right.
So it's those things, that this hero worship. We are a colonized people. They didn't they didn't decolonize education or the bureaucracy. So the bureaucracy builds schools, builds public goods that they never need to use because they are the bada sahab. They're living in mansions and doing that. So I was really hoping that Modi would concentrate on doing those things. And, it's very sad for me that he's got diverted into this temples and wounds of history.
Right. And so let me ask you this then. Is your understanding that he's got diverted, or is your understanding that it was always a conceited, I'm going to distract you with this, and then I'm going to actually deliver this over the next 10 years? Like, what happened? Did he actually get distracted? Did he find that he could not take on those challenges that he'd said, and then he had to resort to, say, lesser populist ideas? What happened in the last 6 years?
I think that it was always in their agenda. Don't forget that his only education has been in the RSS.
Hmm.
That he was first a pracharak, then he became, I mean, he left school before he finished school,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
And so this is how they've been brought up, on a kind of hostility towards Muslims for a start,
Hmm.
this the grievances of history,
Hmm.
which I mean, if they wanted to actually do something constructive with the wounds of history,
Hmm.
then they would try to heal them, no? A truth commission. But they seem to realize that you can win you can win full majority in the Lok Sabha without giving a single Muslim a ticket.
Hmm.
And there is, I mean, let's face it, underneath the surface, there is a hatred of Muslims in India that we have to accept exists,
That
right?
never existed.
No, no, no,
Five.
no,
It always did.
always did.
Ah.
Always did. I mean, I'll be truthful with you. My dadi, after partition, would not allow, uh, what is it, halal or jhatka, whichever one it is, meat to come into the thing.
Halal.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right.
Right.
And she hated Muslims.
Hmm.
Now, it might be because of partition that she hated them,
Hmm.
but I know with a lot of the families that I grew, other than in the schools where the medium is English,
Hmm.
there Hindus and Muslims don't mix,
Hmm.
castes don't mix,
Hmm.
you know. So those divisions are what they have exploited very well. And then when you failed economically and really failed, because his image has been very damaged in this past, since he became prime minister the second time.
Hmm.
He was very keen at one point to be seen as an international statesman,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
And now every article that I read in any major Western publication attacks him. There's
Hmm.
no, I mean, they compare him to Erdogan and Orban, and
Hmm.
I mean, they see India as moving in a
Radical direction.
no, in a fascist direction.
Hmm.
Now, there's something that I learned from Vidya Naipal, which I've
Hmm.
never. He said it's very dangerous to use European words to understand what's going on in India. So, it's very easy to say, and the Congress loves this, oh, fascism, and, communalism and blah, blah, blah. It's not fascism in that sense, but it is an idea of division for power.
Hmm.
And, they're going to end up dividing this country. And, I mean, on the other side, we have a goof, you know. So and there's no one to challenge him except that goof,
Hmm.
So he's really in clover at the moment. So if he thinks hatred is the way forward, that's what we're going to get.
Hmm. That's not a very hopeful picture of. Has it been similar in the past, since you've been looking into this with as much, say, depth and complexity as you are right now, or is it like this unique dark moment in the history of modern India? Like what how do I see this?
See, I've been a journalist for something like 50 years, right?
Hmm.
And during the emergency was one of the darkest moments in Indian history,
Hmm.
and there was total press censorship.
Hmm.
But it strengthened the press, that censorship. It made us want to fight,
Hmm.
and we defied. I mean, certainly the Statesman where I was working, defied Indira Gandhi. If they said you must print this picture of Sanjay Gandhi on the front page tomorrow, which they did,
Hmm.
then we would put it in such a way that he looked like an idiot,
Hmm.
So, and initially there were blank spaces where they eliminated stories and all that kind of thing. What I'm really worried about at the moment, what makes this moment most frightening for me as a journalist, is that the media has been managed in the most in the most in the most dangerous way that you can imagine. I don't know how they've done it, but there are at least four independent news channels, Hindi and English, that are actually government spokesmen. They're vehicles of government propaganda, right?
Hmm.
And those are the ones that stirred up all this thing about Sushant Singh Rajput and it was as if they were acting at the behest of someone.
Hmm.
If you switched channels, if you went from one famous anchor to the next famous anchor's show, it was the same story. First,
Hmm.
that attempt to prove that Sushant Singh Rajput was killed.
Hmm.
Then the attempt to prove that he was killed by Ria Chakravarti. Then that she had stolen his money. They brought in the heavy artillery,
Hmm.
the enforcement directorate,
Hmm.
and this is our money. It's people's money that was used
Hmm.
on a lost cause. I mean,
Hmm.
on a stupid idea. Because actually, all of that could have been done in a much simpler way without, using the media
Hmm.
to do all this. But the media exposed itself, you know,
Hmm.
uh, in this. You knew exactly what they were going to say when the young girl was raped and killed in Hathras.
Hmm.
You knew which channel was, and you still know that.
Hmm.
So, which is why probably we've now heard, I don't know whether you saw Amit Shah's latest interview.
Hmm.
He's just done an interview 2 days ago, 3 days ago, where it's as if he's, been reincarnated after COVID and come back as a different person.
He's,
And
he's
he's actually attacked the trolls,
hmm.
his own troll army. He's actually said that the governor of Maharashtra should had no business to be telling the chief minister, whether he should be more secular or less secular. There were three or four things he said which were extraordinary,
Hmm.
you know. And suddenly there's been the noise on those very channels has softened, it has come down a bit, but
Hmm.
but they've exposed themselves. So I mean, who cares now what they say? I mean, I've resolved I wouldn't go onto one of those
Right.
channels if it was the only channel left.
Right. Right. It's, you know, I was um I was reading a book about Iran. And while I was reading it, I was thinking of, like, it was talking about the Islamic Revolution and how the government structure's been since, and how, like, the socio-political climate is and all of that. And there were a few, I'd say, comparable coordinates between what I saw happen then in Iran, or read happen then in Iran, and I see right now. And one of those things is this idea of West toxified. That's a term the Iranians use a lot. If somebody wears a tie, they're West toxified. If somebody is fond of Western pop culture, or so on and so forth, it's West toxification. And Iran is in a, like, I'm not trying to compare them one is to one, India and Iran, but it's in a unique place by itself. But it's it's similar. Like, what I've also seen is this rejection, this renunciation of what can be borrowed from the West. When you said, how Naipaul says we should not borrow Western concepts to understand the Indic landscape, the Indian land,
Words, Western words.
Western words, right? And that's a fair thing to say. But on the other hand, we have the idea that Mr. Modi, because he's only educated through the RSS, has a very limited worldview. And so, if there is a sort of a toxification that can seep from the West, or an import that might not be exactly accurate that can seep from the West, and then there is a limitation that comes from our education system, for that matter, even RSS education system being so limited, like, how do I imagine the perfect educational specimen? What does that constitute for India?
Um, we have to, for a start, very consciously uh, decolonize the education system, which, sadly, Nehru never did.
Hmm.
So, we produced, for people like me, little Black English girls, who were going to little English schools. And, we read. Do you know that I spoke only Punjabi till I went to school?
Hmm.
And I came out speaking only English. And I mean, I didn't even know, and I have a great fondness for Urdu poetry. The only poetry I really like to read is Urdu poetry. I'd never heard of Ghalib. No, I had heard of him, but I'd
Hmm.
never read any of this. It was all Shelley and Keats and Enid Blyton and all that kind of thing. Now,
Right.
what has happened is that kind of colonization of the public education system that the British set up has gone all the way down to the very bottom. So they had at the top, they wanted people who could become officials of the empire. Lower down, they just wanted serfs, right?
Hmm.
So you go to, if you go into a village school, you come out without being able to read a novel.
Hmm.
You might read Premchand as part of your, your syllabus,
Hmm.
but that's it. You come out. I'll give you an example that Ajit, this man that I live with, he took Amish Tripathi to an engineering college, you know, and Amish is a big promoter of Indian heritage, and he said to them, he said, "How many of you have read mathematics?" And everyone put their hands up and he said, "How many of you know about Bhaskaracharya?"
Hmm.
And not one or one hand went
Hmm.
up.
Hmm. Hmm.
Okay.
Hmm.
Similarly with Mr. Modi, he opened a hospital uh, early in his first term. I think with the Ambanis, it was their hospital. And he talked about how there must have been plastic surgery in India because Ganesh was given an elephant.
Right.
Now, actually, there was plastic surgery in India. The first plastic surgeon in the world, or probably the first surgeon, was Sushant.
Hmm.
But it didn't occur to him, having grown up in a totally Indian environment, that Sushruth is who he should have mentioned. Do you know that if you have a nose job now to this day, they still use the method that Sushruth invented?
Hmm.
And in surgical colleges all over the world, you have a little bust of Sushruth. But how many Indian children know that we did actually invent plastic surgery? Now,
Hmm.
there were great achievements from, in India's past,
Hmm.
which we don't teach our children. So what are you teaching them? You're still not teaching them why they should love India, why they should respect our civilization, our culture, why Sanskrit is important. Atish, as he must have told you, discovered writing from learning Sanskrit.
Hmm.
I mean,
We never got around to that, but that sounds
uh,
wonderful.
he actually realized that there was this huge wealth of Sanskrit literature that he had never read,
Hmm.
and so then he went out and learned Sanskrit, but he couldn't learn it here because here they just teach you how to, a few shloks and, to have conversation in Sanskrit. He had to go to Oxford or Columbia or somewhere. Columbia
Hmm.
from Shelley,
Hmm.
Pollock,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm. Hmm. Hmm.
So, I mean, what are these flaws in our education system that need to be rectified? Does he recognize them? Does he acknowledge them? It saddens me because I really was considered a bhakt,
Hmm.
that the limitations with which his own education was contaminated, continue to prevent him from seeing the bigger canvas.
Right. 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 So on one end, it's like to Mr. Modi and BJP's credit, they did identify, from what I'm understanding up until, is that they did identify a very solid problem that was created by very active agents in India's history. They promised to resolve it on the economic front, they promised to resolve it on the cultural front. The
Yeah.
economic front never showed its head. In fact, what did show its head was distorted policies like demonetization and the lot. And the cultural front was sort of given a second rate corrupted solution, almost as if it was not tried as if like there was no proper thought put behind it, or proper
Yeah.
educators or whatever thought leaders were put behind it. Am I correct in understanding the
Yes.
diagnosing?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And so my question remains, because there is so many people who I respect and I listen to when it comes to say the political understanding of the world, who are sort of losing the last ray of hope with India. Like I've literally sat in conversations where people have been so unhopeful about how things might pan out in the future, as if the last possible leader that we could have imagined, that this last breath of fresh air, this um, last hero that was come, some messiah that was, you use the word messiah, that was supposed to come our way.
At which point I have to show you the book that you
Yes.
you have to talk about.
Right.
Okay,
Yes.
hang on. Before
Right.
have you read it?
I know I have. I've gone through enough parts, reviews, whatever conversations you've had and interviews you've had about it, and that's sort of what I'm trying to get at. Like, what happened to the Messiah? Where is the Messiah?
In the title, there's a question mark.
Yes, I see that.
Is he the Messiah?
Right.
And and the last, the epilogue is titled "Hope Against Hope."
Hmm.
I mean, so I also am among those who I'm just hoping
Hmm.
that, you see, our only hope politically is that somehow the Congress party will find itself out of the clutches of sweet little Rahul and his sweet little sister, and that they will discover that you cannot build this party that has turned into a private limited company from the top. You've got to build it. You don't need a new leader. You need, what you need is, um, you need to build the party up in the villages.
Hmm.
There was a time when you could not go, when I was to cover journalism, when I was doing reporting in the 70s and the 80s. In every village, there would be some guy with a little Gandhi topi who was the Congress representative. He would be from the Seva Dal or whatever. And they were always there everywhere you went. You don't see anyone like that anymore,
Hmm.
right? Under Sonia Gandhi, almost every MP that they have now in the Lok Sabha is the son of a politician. They
Hmm.
closed the doors to good people doing great work at the grassroots level in every area. They just closed those doors, and they allowed it to be turned into a political party of heirs, right? And in politics, heirs don't work. They didn't even work for that long when there were real kings,
Hmm.
right? When it was absolute monarchy, it didn't work so well. It's certainly not in electoral democracies. So, and because there's no other political party showing up,
Hmm.
we've got to hope that the Congress revives itself. But there are some young leaders that I see whose views I don't agree with at all. They're stuck in Marxism and, stuck in the 60s idea of communism and all that sort of thing. But Chandrasekhar Azad is a very inspiring Dalit leader. I think Kanhaiya Kumar, who I don't agree with at all, but he gives you hope. That there may be a generation, your generation, in
Hmm.
the 20s, that would be ready to come forward after they finish their education and come into public life and start thinking of it as public service again,
Hmm.
instead of political power.
Hmm.
Now, unfortunately, with Modi, I actually, Arun Jaitley was a friend of mine for many years. And I asked him early on in Modi's first term, I said, throw them out of Lutyens' Delhi. What are
Hmm.
they doing sitting in properties that are worth hundreds of crore rupees when they can't give people housing? You
Hmm.
know? And he said, we'll do that in the second term. But that hasn't happened. Instead of that, we've got the prime minister trying to build his own house
Hmm.
on near India Gate, on the Central Vista.
Hmm.
And it's sort of less bhavans, we're getting more bhavans on the Central Vista. So that's very worrying because, there's no harm in re-examining history, but if you want to stamp it out, in this way, um, then, it becomes a bit kind of dodgy. But you mustn't give up hope
Hmm.
because actually, कुछ बात है जो हस्ती मिटती नहीं हमारी. Do you know that शेर?
No, please enlighten me.
Iqbal, before he went off. कुछ बात है जो हस्ती मिटती नहीं हमारी, सदियों रहा है दुश्मन दौरे ज़मां हमारा.
Huh.
यूनान मिस्र रोमा सब मिट गए जहां से, अब भी मगर है बाकी नामो निशां हमारा. So,
Huh.
I mean, we've been through hell many times before.
Right. Right.
सदियों रहा है दुश्मन दौरे ज़मां. So, you mustn't give up hope.
Right. You sort of cut out there for a second, but you back now, I think.
Yeah.
Am I incorrect in understanding that what we covered up until we did show your book was sort of kind of the thesis of the book itself? The fact that you went from a
Yeah.
journey of actually being fond of Mr. Modi to then
Mm.
being disenchanted or disillusioned with, his policies and the way things were working.
Yeah. It's really, I really believe that books, political books should not be about theory because I'm not very good at theory anyway.
Mhm.
They should be about it. I like to read anecdotal books, I mean, for instance, for me, the Nadezhda Mandelstam, I always use her as an example,
Hmm.
who was married to the poet Osip Mandelstam. And her book, Hope Against Hope, has told me more about Stalin's Russia, the Stalin's Soviet Union, than I learned from all the big tomes that I've read and, plowed through. So this is in that same vein. It's a book about the journey of Modi, why he came to power,
Hmm.
what he did in his first term. I think it's a pretty fair account of what he did in his first term.
Hmm.
And it ends with the Citizenship Act and the protests, and ends, really with not so much disillusion, but with a kind of desperate hope
Hmm.
that he will somehow find himself,
Hmm.
back, because he's all we've got at the moment.
Hmm.
So he really has to stop being, it's become too much about him,
Hmm.
you know, as happens with a lot of political leaders. They begin to think of themselves rather
Hmm.
than of what they want to do. And I think that if he would just let, for instance, the economy go, just say, I'm all for private enterprise, whether you're on a puttery or whether you're in Ambani's, a huge tower in Bombay, you have the freedom to invest, to make money, do what you like, and we will only regulate.
Hmm.
So he needs to withdraw the state from the economy completely, except as a regulator. I don't know whether they'll let him do that because the bureaucrats, don't like it, and politicians make money by controlling
Hmm.
industry. And politically, he really needs to start thinking, thinking of the bigger canvas, of we really do have a heritage in India which we can be very, very proud of. And it's not about hating Muslims. It's not about love jihad and ghar wapsi and all this rubbish. It is about great, achievements in antiquity.
Hmm.
It's about discovering mathematics and surgery. And, I mean, I think Willie Dalrymple is
Hmm.
already doing a book on, the influence of India in Southeast Asia.
Hmm.
And, how did India's ideas be so compelling that the whole of Southeast Asia
Hmm.
adopted them? Everything came from
Hmm.
India.
Hmm.
That India we need to be proud of. We need to tell our children about it. You need to tell your grandchildren about it. But how are we going to do that if we haven't been taught that?
Hmm.
And the mistake in not teaching it was giving over history textbooks to Marxist historians, who
Hmm.
didn't see um, anything worthwhile that
Hmm.
India had done before Islam came along,
Hmm.
you know, and who tried to cover up, to pretend that really temples were only broken as an economic thing, not because it is in the Quran that you must break idols and you must kill idol worshippers. That's in the Quran,
Hmm.
right? Now let's acknowledge that and say, get real, stop these ideas,
Hmm.
improve yourself. You know,
Hmm.
you don't kill a history teacher in France
Right.
because you think that blasphemy itself is a primitive idea. Get over it.
Right.
You know,
Hmm.
and if we confront these things through debate, there's still hope. Oh my
Hmm.
God, there is still hope. Now that I'm losing my voice, I think we have to wrap it up.
Right.
No.
Right. Absolutely. No, no, no. This has been an absolute pleasure. Hopefully, we'll have one more conversation soon because I have so many unanswered questions still. But thank you so much for doing this.
You're very welcome. And I want to promote my book once more.
Right. No,
Okay?
I will.
And
I will. I will
read it
definitely.
and tell everyone to read it.
Oh, absolutely.
Okay?
I will definitely put the links in the description and everything for everybody who wants to buy this. I think the book's available on Amazon. I think it's available on Flipkart. I think
Yeah.
it's available on
Yeah.
Goodreads. Everywhere there's beautiful reviews written out for the book. I am myself adding it to my library right there. So thank you so
You
much.
must read it. You'll enjoy it.
Mhm. I think so. I think so. Since I've been looking into it, I think that's the next book I'm going to read.
Good.
Thank you so
Thank
much, Miss
you.
Singh. Have a great
Thank
day.
you. You too.